So yes, I know it looks like a baking show, which, by the way, to have my own cooking show, it's kind of a little bit of a dream. So this is just an excuse to do my dream. But we're not here to teach you how to make food, or specifically today, how to make bread. We want to focus on what we've been focusing on, the stories of Jesus. And so to give context at the parable, or the story we're going to look at today, a few years ago I kept getting these videos sent to me by a crew of my friends. And they would continue to send me these videos that were so boring. Like, I would watch them, and the beginning was just, it was trudging to get through them. And so I'd always look, you know how you look to see how long a video is? Because I'm thinking, how long do I have to go through this? But when they would send it, they continually use this phrase, wait for it. So I'd watch a video, and then all of a sudden this snake would pop out at the end. Whoa, you didn't see it coming. Or I would look and I would see someone surfing, and you wouldn't see the person that was out of the picture come in and run into them. So there were all these different videos, and after a while, even though it was tough to trudge through the beginning, I knew it was going to get good. I knew it was going to get better because I just had to wait for it. And so the parable, or the story of Jesus that I'm going to share today, is so appropriate for what we're going through. Because you may be in a situation where you're like, why is this going so slow? Why aren't things picking up speed? I'm not talking about the election here. I'm talking about all around life, from the election to the pandemic to so many things that aren't going the way that we want them to go. I was slipping away for a little quick surf at lunchtime this week. And as I was getting ready, a friend I hadn't seen in a long time was there. So our cars were parked next to each other, and we just started talking and sharing story. And he said, man, what is going on? Like, I can't wait for this to be over. And then he went on and on about the things he was suffering through, the things that weren't going the way he thought they should go. And you could tell he just was not at peace. For the pandemic, he had strong opinions on the virus. He had strong opinions on the election. He didn't like the way our country was going. He didn't like the approach to so many of the issues that have come up in this election. And he just wasn't settled. And basically, as I sat there hearing him, it was almost like, and I told him, I said, hey, just wait for it. We're not citizens here, we're residents here. But God is still working here on earth and in you. And he knew all that, but he couldn't accept it at that moment. Maybe that's where you're at. Maybe you're at a place right now where you know everything I'm saying, but you have a hard time living in it. And so we're going to step back and look at this parable, this story that Jesus gave, because in it, he's talking to his disciples, and he knows that they and us and all that follow Jesus will reach a point where we say, God, where are you? Why aren't you fixing these things? Why is it that I look around and I can tell things aren't the way they should be? And in this parable, I believe the central message that Jesus is trying to get across is, wait for it. Oh, I'm working. It's not on your timeline. It takes time. But I will finish this. I will carry this on to completion. Be patient. So he told stories. He told all kinds of stories. And in Matthew 13, it says that Jesus spoke all these things to the crowd in parables. He did not say anything to them without using a parable. So he was always trying to get the point across with a story. And his stories always started with a question, and they were always dramatic. They're not meant to be allegories. You're not meant to pick every little piece apart. But in this parable of the leaven, or the starter, or the yeast, or in some countries they use beer, it's the story that tells us what the kingdom is doing. Because he says, this is what the kingdom is like. Every parable, for the most part, starts with a question. And so he answers the question by saying, the kingdom of God is like this. The way things work, the way it really is like this. And then he shares this parable. He says to them, the kingdom of heaven is like leaven. This is in English, so he didn't make it rhyme. Which a woman took and hid in 3 pecks of flour until it was all leavened. So when he tells these stories, there's a couple characteristics. One, it's everyday life. They ate bread. They made bread all the time. And it was typical in this culture for the women to make bread. They had bakers, but for the most part, it was just understood. We make our bread. And so in this idea of making our own bread, they all understood what was happening. They were aware. They all knew what leaven was. They all knew what flour was. And so when he says that the woman took it and I like that phrasing there, hid it, because that's what you do. There's something there for us. So what I'm going to do is, like I said, I'm not teaching you to make bread. We're not going to go over all of the details. And a lot of this is going to be fast forwarded. But I especially want us to focus on the leaven and what it does when it's mixed. What God's work behind the scene does in this world. You can't see it happening, but it's happening. Just wait for it. This kind of bread that we're making, which is plain old bread, 2 cups of warm water. And then just a tablespoon of salt and a tablespoon of sugar. I almost forgot the magic. It makes it all happen. So for us, this is what you're familiar with. That's why a lot of times when people are telling the story of the woman, they talk about yeast. Because for us, this is what we use to make the bread rise. Now, if you make sourdough bread, which is just way too hard for me, the beauty is that leaven is that starter. That's the closest example we have to starter. It's a little bit of the dough left over with it in there, and it's this living, moving organism that's transforming. And so you pass that on to every loaf you make. So this would be like the very beginning of creating your own starter. And so this is the same thing. One of these little packets is a tablespoon. And so we're going to wait for this yeast to go all into the water, the warm water, mixed with the sugar and the salt. And then when it's all mixed and it's dissolved, then we can start adding the flour. Right here is the most important thing I want you to take away. I want you to visually see what Jesus was talking about. Because when he tells these stories, they're listening in, they're captured because they know the process that they do at home, which was different from ours, but it's the same concept. And so in this, the whole focus is him talking about the kingdom of God and the starter, the leaven. And it's going to be mixed in with the dough. And when he tells these stories, they're so dramatic and so exaggerated that it grabs their attention. For example, we're going to put 5.5 to 6 cups of flour into here. But for her, he said 3 parts or 3 units, or it's a word that I'm not going to get into, but basically she was using 50 to 60 pounds of flour. All by herself, she had to knead this. I don't even like kneading 6 cups. If I had to double that to 12 cups, to say 50 to 60 pounds, it would be filling this trash can to the top with flour and then putting starter in it. About 3 pounds or so of the starter. So they're listening in on the story. Whoa, that's a lot of bread. Who's she making it for? It doesn't matter. The point is the starter. And he talks about that starter being hidden in there, doing its work, even though you can't see it happening. Even when you're just going, wait, is anything going to happen from this? It looks just like a little clump of dough. It does the work, just like the kingdom of God. You add a little bit at a time because you don't want to put it all in at once. Now, I know what's going to happen. A lot of you are watching this and that's not the way you should do it, or hey, have you tried this? Have you tried that? Again, this is not about bread. This is about Jesus' story. But this is the way you do it. Always. You got to do that. That's what the pros do. I think this is where I say, now subscribe to my channel right below or above or wherever they put those little things. I had to add some water because I can tell that it's drier than usual. The amazing thing is, as I'm doing this, I'm thinking, I wonder if this is kind of what it's like with God and us in this world. Like he's just doing what needs to be done, kneading away, knowing that the work will be completed. So what I really like about the idea of dropping this dough in, it's just so anticlimactic. And I think, is this really going to turn into wonderful bread? Because I love bread. That's why I learned to make it. Because I'd go and I'd eat fresh bread, and it was so good. I'm thinking, why don't we do this ourselves? It must be magical. It must be so difficult that no normal human being could figure it out. And then when I did it the first time, I'm like, I think I messed up. But the leaven, the starter, is inside, invisible, working this very minute. Even though I'm disappointed right now, I just have to wait. I just have to wait for it. And I've seen God do this enough times in my life that I know he's going to do it in the world. I've seen him do it in other people's lives. When they entrust themselves to him, he does the work. And from a distance, it may seem imperceptible. It may seem too small. There wasn't enough. Are you sure you're not supposed to put more in there? But he knows what he's doing. The kingdom of God, that's just another way to say the way things are supposed to be. And so this is the way things are supposed to be. It's a process. It's not overnight. Maybe bread is, but not the transformation that needs to happen in this world, in us. And so we go and put this just for an hour or two, and it's going to be completely different. So imagine what our lives, this world will look like with all the time that God has to do what he's going to do. So a few years ago when I started making bread, I did the same thing every time. I'd look at my little clumpy blob of dough, and I'd think, is anything really going to happen here? And so when I put it in, they tell you it'd rise. And so I'd always kind of look and see, is it rising yet? Is it rising yet? Because I'm impatient. I want to see it happen. It's like my kids. They don't want to wait for the mac and cheese to be made. So when we go to Costco, they want to get the kind where you just pop it into the microwave. As if mac and cheese wasn't easy enough already. They want it even faster. And that's how it is. But every time the dough rises, I'm amazed. Steph and I, my wife, we would look at it and go, look how much it rose. Isn't that crazy? Because it's just crazy to see transformation. And to see God do his work time and time again, it just never gets old. That's the confidence we can have, is you've seen him work. You know he's saying, just wait for it. You've seen this video before. You've seen this. You know how this is going to go. And so here's that same dough after it has risen. And this is only after 2 hours. The crazy thing is when I started with the first piece of dough, it was probably about this size right here. Now I've got more than twice. That's what God does. So as he's sharing this story, they're thinking about their process. They know what it's like to make bread. Even the men knew how to make bread. I mean, obviously not as well as the women. Same as my house. But they knew. And he's trying to tell them, look, think about the world right now and know that I've started a work and I'm going to magnify it. Now, we'll wait some more, but not quite as long. About 30 to 40 minutes. So here we are, just waiting. And maybe you're waiting right now. Maybe you're like my friend that I saw on the beach. Maybe it's your marriage. Maybe you're like, God, I handed over my life to you. Why has this not changed yet? Or maybe it's your finances. Or maybe it's your children. Things come and go. Things change. But the important things, the eternal, God is working. And he will finish what he started. But you may be at that place where you're just like, is this ever going to change? This isn't the way it's supposed to be. I think of the disciples. When Jesus was arrested and then taken away to be crucified, they just kind of gave up. The story wasn't going the way they thought it was supposed to go. They didn't have the patience for it. They thought they had written the ending already. And so they walked away. And maybe that's what you feel like doing. Maybe you feel like, I'm just over this. I know you're over a lot of the things that are happening, but I mean, you're just over depending on God and trusting in him. And this story that Jesus is sharing, he's sharing it to these people in the same way that he shares to us, because this is the way it is with every generation and every culture. He's going to transform everything. As good as this bread is going to smell, it's nothing like we are going to be transformed in his hands as he needs us into what we need to be. And he's doing this thing behind the scenes, and that's where our trust and our faith is. I know that this bread will come out good because I've seen it happen tons of times. And if you haven't seen God work, it's beautiful. It's better than fresh baked bread, for sure. And once it's transformed, once we are transformed, once this world is transformed, when the kingdom of God is here, it's going to be the way it's supposed to be, but it's also going to seem like, isn't this the way it's always been? And the troubles and the waiting and the ugly clump of dough, you'll forget about it. The kingdom of God is like a woman who took 50 pounds of flour and she put leaven in it. She hid it in there. And then she kneaded the bread. And they all knew what would happen. May you be reminded what's going to happen. May you hear the words of Paul when he was speaking to the people in Philippi. He basically said this: I know my God, and I'm confident that he's going to finish the work that he started in you. It's almost like this is the way it always was. Oh, that's good.